bigger tapestry is developing so fast now that I've even been stunned by its velocity. And what I mean by that is, I've talked about the massive shift, inexorable, that's taking place, power from the West to the East. I had no idea that in physical terms alone, and perhaps Trump is hastening this in other physical terms, like taking other people's oil tankers. But in physical terms, it's coming to a crescendo of debt, if you will, that is staggering. Scott Bessent, the Secretary of the Treasury right now, and he can't not know this, is looking at having to borrow $3 trillion in the very immediate future, or we default. Now, think about that for a minute. $3 trillion when most of the world, even our Japanese allies, because they're having so much physical difficulties right now, aren't going to buy those notes. There's only one country in the world, bar none, that can even begin to help us with our debt. And you know who that is. So we are in a real significant empire-ending pickle right now. And it's come much more swiftly than I thought it was going to come. I kind of thought it would sneak up on us over the next 3 to 5 years. It's coming in a crescendo of debt that Bessent is going to have to deal with, and he, I suspect, knows it. He's not stupid. And I'm just wondering how much of this is getting through to Trump, because these moves we've been making are all indicative of our knowing, but not knowing how to get out. In other words, I think the administration from Vance to Bessent, from Nome to whomever, is somewhat aware, if not deeply aware, of the crisis we're headed into, but they don't know what to do about it. And so they're floundering around mostly, which seems to be pretty characteristic of this administration. But these other things like Ukraine, Venezuela, while it's indicative of the crisis, very much so, we need that oil desperately in order for Bessent to have any chance of getting some kind of relief in terms of the immediate crisis of debt facing us. And that's the reason we're really there. I knew that was a big part of the reason, but I couldn't fathom just how much a big part of it was until I started looking at the refining, what we can do, what others can do, how the global oil markets are operating right now, how so many sales are now being denominated in renminbi, rupees, rubles, even the South American rand, the South American, the South African, I forget their currency right now. And how much that means for what was keeping the empire relatively stable in a physical sense, and that was the global oil sales being denominated by force majeure, if nothing else, in the dollar. That's not happening anymore. That tanker that we confiscated, that tanker that we pirated away and took into our custody, that tanker was going to a place where that oil was gonna be turned into other people's currencies, not dollars. As much an act of piracy as it was also an act of desperation. So all to come back to the earth, if you will, but the earth is what I just described, I'm afraid. We are going to start making deals you won't believe because we've got to. And to a certain extent, we've got to make sure that the key leaders in Europe understand what's happening too. Because if they don't, they're going to be an anchor on our doing what we need to do. And they're going to go down with us big time because they're not doing that well, economically speaking, either. And so this could be a tsunami that it takes out the Western Hemisphere virtually, minus those in the South who've got their act together now. When I say that, I mean everyone from Venezuela and Colombia down through Brazil and on down to Argentina and Chile to lesser degrees. Isn't it interesting? It's the only part of the Western Hemisphere that looks healthy right now in some respects. Certainly Brazil and certainly some of the other countries in the northern part of South America. So all to say that I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'll guarantee it's going to surprise the world because we are going to cut ourselves away from the Ukraine war as fast as we possibly can. And we're going to cut our way away from some of the things we've done to punish Russia. Because not only do we understand that in order to get Xi Jinping to do what he must do to save the American empire, I don't mean save it as an empire. I mean save it as an intact entity that doesn't fall apart and begin to disintegrate. And he doesn't want that. He doesn't want that either. So in order to get him to do that, we've got to be a lot more accommodating, and particularly with Russia and with India to a certain extent, and with China, a lot more accommodating. I mean, he's not going to sit down and write out a list. This is what you got to do, Donald, because he knows Donald wouldn't understand a thing on the list, probably. He does understand, I think, that there are some people in administration who are going to understand what they have to do and the speed and alacrity with which they have to do it. And so I look for a lot of these, well, I should say I look for one of two eventualities. We're going to go smashing our way through this, trying to, and get roundly defeated on a number of fronts and have to back up and then collapse, really collapse, physically and otherwise. Or we're going to read, and I think this is what we're doing right now, especially the Secretary of the Treasury, we're going to read the tea leaves, and we're going to understand that we have to deal with Xi Jinping on an entirely different basis. And I'm not saying we're going to come hat in hand and beg, but we're going to let him know through other channels, if you will, that we are desperate and we need his help. And that's going to tone and tint and color all these other things too, I think. It's going to make a deal with Venezuela. All these military forces out there notwithstanding, there's going to be a deal. And the deal is going to be good for Maduro, good for Venezuela, and good for the United States. And Trump can paint it any way he wants to with whatever paintbrush and whatever oils he wants to paint it with, or he can be an idiot and go off and rumble and pee in his pants over it. It's going to have to be made, and it's going to have to take place, because otherwise what I described is going to happen to us, and it's going to happen much faster and much more profoundly in that fastness than I ever thought.
So you have this creeping economic collapse coming, or a massive crisis. I think this is becoming quite evident to many. I also made the point before that a lot of the billionaires appear to be cashing out and
Yeah.
preparing for what is happening. So, uh, of course, behind all the nice media headlines, something horrible is building up. But I thought that this could go two ways in terms of how the U.S. responds, because on one hand, yes, it could be forced to make some deal with countries like Venezuela. On the other hand, if they want to really shore up their ability to loan money, to lend it against something hard, some hard assets, it would make sense as well to, this is not advocacy, of course, but to try to conquer Venezuela. Obviously, I don't think this is going to play out as they would then hope. But if one is in such a dire strait, needs money from other countries, as one is teetering on the brink of collapse, wouldn't this be problematic? I mean, who would lend to a country which might collapse, and also who is now seizing money from adversaries? And this is, of course, not just about the United States. The Europeans are also in very deep trouble. That they couldn't come to an agreement to steal the Russian assets, so instead they're lending more money, but they nonetheless permanently freeze the Russian assets, and they will demand reparations, which means give us money, pay our bills. So my point is, when a country is in this deep trouble and it's showing that it's prepared to freeze or steal assets of other countries, do you think it's likely that a country like China would come through and try to bail out the United States?